This week, nVidia is launching the all-new RTX 4070 Super, a sub-$600 graphics card that they promise delivers flagship-level performance. Is this an all-new leaf for nVidia to turn over, or is it just more of the same? Today's video is brought to you by me. Check out craftcomputing.store for all of my official merch, and help fund the content that you enjoy watching here on the channel. From custom laser-engraved pint glasses, to coasters and whiskey stones, and even our brand new double-wall insulated coffee tumblers, all of my merch is designed 100% in-house and made to order by me. I'm also now offering flat-rate international shipping to 23 different countries, and if you live in the continental US, free shipping on orders over $35. So, what are you waiting for? Head on over to craftcomputing.store and start drinking like a pro. Cheers, everyone. Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff. So, nVidia has finally announced the rumored 4000 series supercards that we've been hearing about since October. And on the table next to me is the first that are launching this month. This is the RTX 4070 Super, and I think it's the most interesting of the new three cards as well, especially if you've been holding on to a high-end graphics card from a couple generations back. Whether it's been crypto bros buying up every GPU on the market, scalpers charging double on the secondary market, supply chain issues from a global pandemic, Crypto Boom 2, Electric Boogaloo, or nVidia and AMD focusing only on their high-end silicon in pursuit of AI supremacy, there hasn't been a GPU under $800 to get excited about in a very long time. During nVidia's announcement at CES 2024, there was one thing in particular that piqued my interest. nVidia claimed that the all-new RTX 4070 Super is, quote, faster than an RTX 3090.
We've added 20% more cores, making it faster than the RTX 3090.
That's a pretty bold claim, but if it's true, it might be just the upgrade you're looking for to replace an aging Pascal or Turing GPU. And it's that scenario that I wanted to test out in this video. Obviously, the 4070 Super is going to be much faster than even the flagships of those generations, but is it fast enough to make a noticeable difference? I'm not going to focus too much on specs in this video, as I'm sure there will be at least a couple other reviewers who make those deep dives for those that are interested. I'm just going to answer two questions. Is the RTX 4070 Super faster than an RTX 3090 like nVidia claimed? And would this new $599 GPU be a solid upgrade if you have a 10 or 20 series graphics card? What I will say is, according to nVidia, the existing RTX 4070 will be sticking around and is priced at $549, just $50 below the new RTX 4070 Super. Do not buy that card. Just based on pure specs, the 4070 will be about 20% slower than the Super and poses a terrible value no matter how you slice it. I wish nVidia would have either lowered the price of the 4070 substantially or discontinued it altogether, just like they did with the 4070 Ti and the 4080 that they're also replacing later this month. With that public service announcement out of the way, let's get down to answering the questions I posed just a moment ago. To answer the upgrade question, if you have a 10 or 20 series GPU, I'm testing the 4070 Super against the flagships from those generations. For Turing, it's the 2080 Ti. Unfortunately, I no longer have a 1080 Ti in my collection, but I do have the GTX Titan X Pascal variant, which is virtually identical performance-wise, having the same number of CUDA cores and an extra 1GB of video memory. This is not the Titan XP that launched about 6 months later with its 12GB of video memory and 3800 CUDA cores. This is the 3500 CUDA core variant. We've also got the RTX 4070 Ti from Zotac with the Amp Extreme, a card that sells for $929 on Amazon as of the time of filming. Again, the 4070 Ti is being discontinued by nVidia, but I wanted to demonstrate this card to show how much gaming performance has cost over the last couple of years, and particularly why I'm so excited about the potential of a $599 RTX 4070 Super. I'm testing with the flagships from both of these generations as they give a great high watermark, making the performance differences clear no matter which GPU you own from either the Pascal or the Turing lineups. And with nVidia dropping the claim like faster than an RTX 3090, I've got the Founders Edition RTX 3090 here on the table for a sanity check, along with the AMD Radeon 6900 XT. The 6900 XT has been really interesting in these benchmarks for a couple reasons. One, you can buy either a 6900 XT or a 6950 XT for under $600 today from a number of different retailers. Plus, it's always stacked up well against the RTX 3090. I would have also tested the Radeon 7800 XT, which was released a couple months ago for $500 from AMD. But with CES last week, I wasn't able to source a review unit in time. And sorry, I'm not going to buy one just for this review. But the 7800 XT and the 6900 XT perform within a couple percentage points of each other in most benchmarks. So take that for what it's worth. The test system for today is going to be Project Icarus, a PC I built last year. It's rocking an ASRock X670E Taichi motherboard and a Ryzen 7900 X3D 12-core CPU. It's got 32GB of DDR5 running at 6,000 megatransfers per second, along with a 2TB Patriot Viper Gen 4x4 NVMe drive. One final note before we get into the benchmarks: if you are upgrading from an older GPU, and your CPU is around the same age, you may want to think about a complete system upgrade as well, not just upgrading your GPU. nVidia 10 series GPUs launched alongside Intel's Skylake 6th generation chips, along with 1st generation Ryzen, and both of those platforms aren't going to hold up that well with modern GPUs as powerful as the 3090, let alone the fact that modern GPUs also need PCI Express 4.0 to reach their full potential, and that didn't debut on consumer products until 2019. I'm looking at exploring where CPU and PCI Express bottlenecks exist today in a future video. Let me know down in the comments if that's something you'd like to see. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe while you're down there. And with all that out of the way, let's get into the benchmarks and see if we can't make sense of NVIDIA's 3090 performance claims, starting with 3D Mark. In DirectX 11 with Firestrike Ultra, the RTX 3090 posted a graphics score of 12,640, which, funny enough, clocks at 9% slower than the Radeon 6900 XT from Team Red. But the question of the day, is the RTX 4070 Super as fast as the 3090? The first result of the day says no, but not by much, with a score of 12,134, placing it just 4% behind the former $1,600 flagship GPU. As for the other former flagships, the Titan X Pascal manages a score of 6962, with the 2080 Ti managing an 8305. That means the 4070 Ti is a full 74% faster than the Titan, and about 46% up on the 2080 Ti. Those are some promising early results. As for the last number of years, cards in the $600 price range showed little to no gains over the 2080 Ti. And it's not like the 2080 Ti set the world on fire when it launched either. Moving on to DirectX 12 and TimeSpy Extreme, this time the top two scores are reversed, with the RTX 3090 taking the lead over the 6900 XT, with a score of 10,161 to 9565. The 4070 Super also keeps things close, with a score of 9997, or barely 1.5% behind the RTX 3090. I can't help but notice that the 4070 Super is very close to the 3090, but my numbers have it stopping short of being better than the 3090. Will that trend continue? Results for the 10 and 20 series flagships are also very similar here, but this time with a much wider gap. The Titan X Pascal scored a 4426 for graphics, meaning the 4070 Super is well over twice as fast here. The 2080 Ti scored a 6755, meaning yet again the 4070 Super is around 50% faster. 3D Mark Speedway is a test for DirectX 12 Ultimate compatible GPUs, which means the Titan X gets to sit this one out, as it only supports DirectX 12.1. The 6900 XT also didn't look great here due to its lackluster ray tracing performance, scoring well behind the 3090. Love it or hate it, ray tracing isn't going anywhere, and as more games take advantage or straight up require the tech, it might need to be part of your buying decision eventually. The 4070 Super again falls just shy of the RTX 3090, scoring a 5189 to the 3090's 5413. And the 2080 Ti shows both its age and its first generation RT cores here, scoring just barely 3,000 points. In Port Royal, a benchmark specifically for ray tracing performance, it's again the RTX 3090 on top with a score of 13,425, with the 4070 Super hanging close at 13,000, again just 3% shy of NVIDIA's claims. While Port Royal doesn't care if you actually have ray tracing hardware, that doesn't mean you're going to score well just because the benchmark can run. The non-RTX Titan X Pascal gets a participation trophy with a score of just 2376, while the 2080 Ti nearly triples that mark with a score of 8950. Yet again, we're seeing the 4070 Super as being around 45% faster than the 2080 Ti. And I don't think I need to remind anyone who bought one that the 2080 Ti was $1,000 when it debuted in 2018. Before we get into gaming, the 4070 Super is already looking like a solid upgrade option at $600. But let's let the games speak for themselves. So, I think it's time we actually got into it. All games were tested at 1440p and 4K resolutions with ultra settings. There are a couple titles that struggled even on the RTX 3090 and the 4070 Super at these resolutions, especially when ray tracing was enabled. nVidia is touting the 4070 Super as a 1440p card, and I think I have to agree with that after running it through the gauntlet. Though it goes to show that nVidia may have been a bit premature to declare the 3090 as a 4K card, at least without DLSS or any other upscaling tech enabled. And for note, none of these tests had DLSS or FSR enabled, but again, that's a concept I may explore in a future video to see where the market exists today. Starting off with Cyberpunk 2077, and at least at 4K, the 4070 Super is not able to hang with a 3090, averaging just 37 frames per second to 47 frames per second on that 3090. The 4070 Super is faster than the 6900 XT here, but I still wouldn't call 37 frames per second playable out of a $600 graphics card. At 1440p, I feel we can actually draw some conclusions. The 3090 managed an average of 93 FPS and a 0.1% low of 58, and the 4070 Super again keeps things very close with 90 frames per second on average and a low of 49 respectively, showing a similar result to the synthetic tests. The 4070 Super again sits around 45% faster than the 2080 Ti, which did manage 64 frames per second on average. The Titan X does show its age here, with just 36 frames per second on average and a 0.1% low of 30, meaning the 4070 Super is 2.5 times faster here. But what happens when we turn on the lights and trace some rays? Well, we finally get a win out of the 4070 Super, with an average of 40 frames per second to the 3090's 39. Low frame rates were also slightly better on the 4070 Super as well. The 2080 Ti doesn't hold up nearly as well here with its first-gen RT cores either, managing just 22 frames per second on average, or barely over half as fast as the 4070 Super. And of course, the Pascal-based Titan doesn't have the ability to enable ray tracing, so it finishes this one with a forfeit. Switching gears and taking a look at Project Cars 3, my eyes are again on the RTX 3090. At 4K, it put up a blistering 171 frames per second on average and a 0.1% low of 62. That's a fantastic result, but it's not quite good enough to beat the 4070 Super. In fact, the 4070 Super and the RTX 3090 finished in a dead tie with 171.1 frames per second on average, but with the 4070 Super keeping its 0.1% lows marginally ahead at 68 frames per second. At 4K, I'm actually very surprised with how well the Titan X Pascal and the 2080 Ti both hold up here, at 93 and 128 frames per second on average respectively. If all you do is racing, I don't actually think you need to upgrade from either of these GPUs, even with the 4070 Super being 83 and 34% faster. It's just not going to make that much of a difference if you're already close to maxing out a 120Hz 4K monitor. At 1440p, the 4070 Super is around 10% faster than the RTX 4090, but about 0.5% behind the 6900 XT. But not that those differences are perceptible though, as we're talking about a difference of 1 frame per second at 242. Red Dead Redemption 2 is one of the most scalable titles, and by that, I mean it's playable on just about any hardware you throw at it, but also equally capable of bringing any rig to its knees. With every option cranked to ultra settings, the 4070 Super still managed 64 frames per second on average, and even more impressively, a low of just 43. Here again, we see single-digit margins between the RTX 3090 and the 4070 Super, with the Super holding the slight edge here. The Titan X went full cinematic mode here, with the frame rate averaging just 24 frames per second and lows in the low teens. The 2080 Ti fared slightly better at 42 frames per second, but couldn't keep the lows above 30. Here, the 4070 Super is 2.7 times faster than the Titan and around 55% faster than the 2080 Ti. If you're after 4K gaming, it turns slideshows into actual playable games. We see similar results at 1440p, where even though the 2080 Ti managed 65 frames per second on average, the 4070 Super racked up 100 frames per second and a low of just 69. That would make a very nice upgrade to this card, to say the least. One game that surprised me a bit was Man Remastered, as the older cards managed to hang around even at 4K and ultra settings. The Titan X hit an average of 47 frames per second and a low of 33, which depending on your standards isn't half bad and only a couple tweaks away from potentially averaging 60 FPS or more. The 2080 Ti managed 80 frames per second and a low of 49, making it playable no matter how much of a snob you are. Of course, the 4070 Super was 118% faster than the Titan and 38% faster than the 2080 Ti, with almost identical results at 1440p. With ray tracing enabled, the 4070 Super is 57% faster than the 2080 Ti at 4K, and around 41% faster at 1440p. The 2080 Ti struggles mightily here at 4K though, with a low of just 18 frames per second. Decent performance at 1440p still, with 74 frames per second on average and a low of 42. So again, unless you're aiming for 4K, I might continue to ride the 2080 Ti here. I'd say it's a similar story when it comes to Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. The Titan X Pascal does manage 66 frames per second at 1440p, but a low of just 33, which is pretty tough to take in a Twitch shooter like this. The 2080 Ti holds up much better, averaging 86 frames per second, but with a much more manageable low of 46. The 4070 Super, though, is again light years ahead of the Titan X, and a familiar 53% faster than the 2080 Ti. The game is buttery smooth at 146 frames per second, and a 1% low of 92, with a 0.1% low of 56. None of the cards hold up that well at 4K though, despite the averages being in the high 70s for the 4070 Super, the 6900 XT, and the RTX 3090. This is one game that needs just a few more frames to help keep your reaction times quick. Again, turning settings down a scotch here would help dramatically, and would also probably help the 2080 Ti and Titan X run well enough at 1440p. Alright, I think it's time for the big guns here to stretch their legs a bit. Jumping into Doom Eternal at 4K and Ultra Nightmare settings, the 4070 Super managed not only 207 FPS on average, it also kept its 0.1% low at 120 frames per second. So I say bring on the 4K 240Hz panels if demon slaying is your jam. While the 4070 Super was 2.5 times faster than the Titan X, and nearly 60% in front of the 2080 Ti, the old guard still fared well, at 79 and 131 frames per second respectively. Even low frame rates were kept in check here, proving both cards are still perfectly capable of running Doom Eternal at 4K and max settings. If you game at 1440p, I'd say you don't even need to consider an upgrade, with the Titan X clocking in 140 frames per second and the 2080 Ti flat out screaming at 231. Though, if it's bragging rights you're after, the 4070 Super did manage over 350 frames per second at 1440, with a 0.1% low of 185. The game also supports ray tracing, but here's the deal. Even when I was trying to pixel peep, I couldn't see how it was implemented in this game, let alone if it was any better than traditional volumetric lighting or reflections. I do know it cut frame rates down across the board by about 40%, so it must be doing something. But I've got to recommend that even the most hardcore RTXers in the crowd leave this one turned off. One of the biggest announcements nVidia had at CES was the release of RTX Remix to anyone who wants to use it. It's a platform to remaster older titles with ray tracing, DLSS, and all the other goodies that come from modern RTX cards. One of the titles to drop recently with the help of Remix was Portal, completely redrawn with ray tracing everywhere, from reflections to lighting and shadows to occlusion, and even refraction through glass. It is a stunningly beautiful remaster of a classic game. Unfortunately, I ran into some weird problems during testing, so these results are not part of my final conclusion, but I did want to post them here for posterity's sake, just in case anyone was interested in how the 4070 Super fared. The 4070 Super had some odd stuttering that wasn't present on the 4070 Ti or the 2080 Ti. The 3090 also fell on its face. Even though frame rates were fairly consistent, it was 81% slower than the 4070 Super at 1440p. I'm positive this is likely a driver issue, and all testing for NVIDIA cards was done with the press driver version 546.52. I'm sure performance will be addressed in a future update, and based on the 4070 Ti scores, it should play very well on the 4070 Super once finished. Also, as a bit of a side note, obviously RTX Remix titles are going to be well optimized for NVIDIA RT cores, but that doesn't mean they're excluding AMD from being able to play these games. So if you have a 6000 series or higher AMD card, you should be able to play the games, albeit with some reduced performance. But that still doesn't explain the 2 frames per second that I got on the 6900 XT. One title I was hoping for big results with was Hogwarts Legacy. It's a fairly demanding title, especially when cranked to the max or when ray tracing is enabled. I also feel that this title shines a bit more brightly at higher resolutions, much like Tomb Raider games from the last 5 and 10 years. At 4K, the Titan X falls a bit short at just 23 frames per second on average and a low of 17. The 2080 Ti doesn't fare much better either, hitting 39 FPS on average and a low of 23. Again, the 4070 Super provides a great boost, scoring around 2.5 times faster than the Titan X, and a much more modest 38% faster than the 2080 Ti. That brings the average frame rate up to 54, with a low of 32. Not perfect, but a much more enjoyable experience to be sure. With ray tracing enabled, it's not a pretty picture no matter which card you're on. The 4070 Super may still be 50% faster than the 2080 Ti, but 30 FPS with a low of 21 isn't going to get it done, even in a slightly slower moving game like Hogwarts. Results aren't even great at 1440p, with the Super averaging 62 frames per second, but it still had a low of 28. Much like Doom though, I didn't see much, if any, difference visually with ray tracing enabled or not. In fact, with RT enabled on the 6900 XT, there were weird shimmering and ghosting effects around any moving object. And again, that's without any upscalers enabled. Leaving ray tracing disabled gives some fairly playable results at 4K, and stellar results at 1440p with the 4070 Super. The 2080 Ti holds up well enough at 1440p with an average of 79 FPS, but again, it's the Titan that struggles even here, with an average of 48, but a low of 23. And finally, let's take a look at Starfield. Now, I know Cyberpunk likes to take all the credit for being able to stress any system to its absolute limit, but Starfield manages to do it without even enabling ray tracing. At 1440p, the Titan X Pascal can't even hit 30 frames per second, and tanks down all the way to a low of 17. Not great, considering some of the ground combat can require some pretty twitchy reactions. The 2080 Ti hits 50 frames per second, but again also struggles to keep the lows above 20. This is the kind of situation where a video card upgrade can turn a game from a frustrating and laggy experience to incredibly playable, with the 4070 Super hitting 76 frames per second, and even more impressively, a low of just 41, twice as fast as the 2080 Ti. In fact, the Super has an average frame rate 3 times faster than the Titan X Pascal, the darling card that no one wants to see put out to pasture yet. If you're after 4K and ultra settings, you'd best look at nVidia's 4080 Super coming out later this month, because neither the 3090 nor the 4070 Super are going to impress you here. Heck, even the 4070 Ti struggled to hit 50 frames per second with a low of 30. We set out to answer 2 questions in this review. The first was figuring out if nVidia's statement about the 4070 Super being faster than the 3090 was true. The other was seeing if the 4070 Super was a viable upgrade option for anyone still on 10 or 20 series GPUs, holding out for anything of value to drop below $1,000. To the RTX 3090, the results say that at 4K, on average, the 4070 Super is around 4% slower than the Ampere flagship. However, the 4070 Super is around 2.6% faster than the 3090 at 1440p. When I hear a company claim a product is faster, as a reviewer, I don't want a difference that's measured down to the nth percentile and visible only on a graph. I want a difference that's perceptible to the end user, and that's just not the case here. With that being said though, we're talking about a difference of only a couple percent either way, so for all intents and purposes, I'd make the claim that the 4070 Super is equal to the RTX 3090, which is still a huge win if you're in the market for a GPU at $600. Remember, the 3090 debuted just over 3 years ago at $1,600, and more often than not sold well north of $2,000 due to factors discussed at the beginning of this video. If you've been looking for a sub-$600 GPU that actually packs a punch and is going to last for multiple generations into the future, you can do a lot worse than the 4070 Super. Look at the 4070. Now, speaking to the upgrade choice, on average, the 4070 Super was 52% faster than the 2080 Ti, and about 65% faster when ray tracing was enabled. I'd say if you're looking at playing 1440p ultra settings, and this is going to be a bit controversial, I might actually stick with the 2080 Ti for at least one more generation. At 1440p and ultra settings, and without ray tracing enabled, the 2080 Ti still managed 111 frames per second on average and a low of 62 across the 8 games that I tested. Meanwhile, the 4070 Super, even though it's 45% faster, it hit 161 frames per second on average and a low of 73. While that's an impressive difference, I'm not sure it's perceptible outside of those who are gaming competitively. And if you're gaming competitively, you're also not playing on max settings, so those factors kind of cancel each other out. I know the 2080 Ti feels ancient at this point, debuting nearly 6 years ago, and with no clear-cut replacement coming to the market that doesn't also carry a 4-figure price tag. But given it'll still pump out frames 110 at a time, it's hard to see the need for an upgrade, at least when it comes to straight up rasterization. The Titan X Pascal, otherwise known as the 1080 Ti but with 12 gigs of memory, does not hold up to max settings nearly as well, with an average of 72 frames per second and lows down to 38. If you are still on a 60Hz panel, you're probably still content with that level of performance though. But if you've recently upgraded to a 144Hz 1440p panel and are ready to take advantage of it without endlessly tweaking your game settings, the 4070 Super is priced right to deliver exactly that: uncompromising 1440p performance. As far as owners of other cards in the 10 and 20 series lineups though, the 4070 Super is probably a no-brainer upgrade at $599. Adjusted for inflation, or corporate profit racketeering, it's probably about even with the asking price of a 1070 or 2070 from 6 or 8 years ago, and will more than double your performance across the board. There are two other things I noticed as well during my testing here. First, if transitive benchmarks are to be believed, another fantastic bargain can be had in the Radeon 7800 XT. The 4070 Super was faster nearly across the board against my 6900 XT by around 7%. With the 7800 XT selling for between $500 and $550, it could make a killer deal, though it will have worse ray tracing performance than the 4070 Super, if that's something that matters to you. Second, even though nVidia is retiring the 4070 Ti, it's clear they wanted to keep the 4070 Super in its place, with the 4070 Ti winning each and every benchmark, synthetic or gaming, by about 5 to 12%. If the 4070 Super comes out at its MSRP of $599, I think it's the card to beat if you want all of the latest API goodies that come with RTX. If it creeps up the scale though, as nVidia partner cards tend to do, it might be a great move to snag an outgoing 4070 Ti at a discounted price. Either way, I can't tell you how thrilled I am that we again finally have some compelling options in the $500 to $600 price point, as the market has been top-heavy for far too long. But I am still hoping for some competition in the budget space, maybe in the second half of this year. We'll have to see. But that's going to do for me in this video. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down below. On your way down there, drop this video a like and check out the video description for affiliate links for every card and part that I featured in today's video. Also, make sure to follow me on the social medias at Craft Computing for daily shenanigans like this. And if you like the content you see on this channel and want to help support me in what I do, consider joining the Patreon. Link is also down in the video description. That's going to do for me in this one. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys. So have we decided we love or we hate this card? I just want to be on board so I don't piss off the YouTube comments again. Okay. Okay, you're sure? Okay. All right. Bye. Beer for today is from 10 Barrel Brewing out of Bend, Oregon. It is the NAIPA, non-alcoholic IPA. See what this one tastes like. Well, it's fairly clear. They have that going for them. There's something odd about this beer, besides the fact that it's non-alcoholic. It doesn't feel right. I've reviewed a couple NA beers in the past on the channel, specifically from Athletic Brewing, and those have always been very surprising, very bold flavors, and honestly, if you didn't tell me it was NA, I probably wouldn't have guessed as such. This, it doesn't taste like a non-alcoholic beer, but it also doesn't really taste like a beer. I mean, there's some hops in there. I'm getting more of like a hopped water, Klausthaller kind of feel to it. But there's something else just weird about it. I don't love it. Oh! I should trust my instincts more often. 10 Barrel NAIPA non-alcoholic brew. It says brew. But that says malt beverage. That's why it tastes cheap. Okay. 10 Barrel, I'm a little disappointed. Normally, InBev's fingerprints don't get quite that deep into you, but here we are. Something in my brain told me this wasn't great. And there it is. All right. Can't say I recommend this one.